In the sprawling silence of her own luxurious home, 8-year-old Diane Miller had been turned into a modern-day Cinderella. She was on her hands and knees, her small body trembling as she balanced her infant brother, Benny, on her back while scrubbing the gleaming hardwood floors. On the plush leather sofa, her Aunt Martha lounged, lazily popping grapes into her mouth and contemptuously spitting the skins onto the very floor Diane was cleaning. Martha berated her endlessly, savoring her power. "Faster, you useless girl," she snapped. "Your mother was beautiful, and look where it got her. Dead." Diane bit her lip to stop a sob, knowing tears only made the torment worse. "Please, Auntie," she whispered. "Benny needs his milk. He'll get it when I'm good and ready," Martha sneered. But just as Martha relished her absolute control, the heavy front door swung open. Alexander Miller, the girl's millionaire father, was home weeks early. He stood paralyzed, his eyes locking onto the horrific scene. His precious daughter reduced to a servant, his infant son strapped to her back, and the cruel woman he had trusted sitting like a queen. The silence that followed was deafening. "What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video." The house, which had once been a home filled with warmth, now lay silent and cold. The television in the living room droned quietly, an old game show melody barely audible, but no one was paying attention. On the large sofa, Martha, 39 years old, obese, her curly hair a tangled mess tied carelessly at the nape of her neck, was sprawled out like someone weary of life, yet always savoring her own power. Her hand lazily lifted each grape to her mouth, chewing slowly, only to spit the skin directly onto the gleaming hardwood floor. Each time a grape skin landed with a soft pat. Diane Miller winced. She was only 8 years old, fragile. She wore a mended, faded t-shirt. She was carrying her little brother on her back, her small knees pressed against the floorboards, her trembling hands gripping a cleaning rag, her back hunched as she scrubbed the stains Martha had so carelessly created. On her back, Benny, just 7 months old, whimpered from hunger. His tiny lips were chapped and dry, his little head nestled into his sister's shoulder, as if seeking warmth and comfort. Martha looked at her with contempt. Her shrill voice dragged, cruel and mocking. "Faster, you useless brat. Do you think acting like your mother will make anyone want you? She was beautiful. So what? What good is beauty when you die young?" The words cut through Diane's heart like a shard of glass. She clenched her small hands. Her thin body trembled. Her mother had died giving birth to Benny. And every time Martha mentioned her mother with that bitter tone, Diane felt her heart shatter. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, but she made no sound. She knew that if she cried, Martha would only find another excuse to humiliate her. Diane lowered her head, her voice so soft it was barely a whisper. "Please, Auntie, let him have some milk first. I'll do everything, I promise. Just let him drink a little." Benny stirred on her back. His weak cries rose as an echo of Diane's plea, but Martha was unmoved. She lurched up, grabbed another grape, and spit the skin right next to the bucket of dirty water Diane was using. "Shut your mouth," Martha shrieked, her sharp voice echoing in the room. "If you dare whisper one word of this to your father again, I'll pour all the formula down the drain. I'm telling you." "Understood?" A sob escaped Diane's throat. Her small hands gripped the rag until her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were bloodshot, but not a single tear fell. She bent back to the floor, her spine curving under the weight of her brother, and continued cleaning the grape skins, the dust, the grime that Martha deliberately left behind. Inside her, a heavy darkness spread. She wanted to scream, to run outside, to tell her father everything, but the image of the fragile, tiny Benny on her shoulder kept her silent. If she stayed quiet, her brother would get milk. If she endured, he would survive. Benny's cries faltered. His breathing became shallow. Diane ducked her head, whispering into his fine hair. "Don't cry anymore, Benny, I'm here. I won't let you starve." Martha let out a harsh laugh, a hollow sound that bounced off the expensive furniture. She settled back onto the sofa, turning up the volume on the TV, her voice mixing with the overly enthusiastic announcer on the screen. "Your father thinks he's so smart," Martha sneered. "He thinks sending money is enough. And then what? It's all in my hands, you two. I'm the one who decides what you eat, how you live. Diane froze. Every word from Martha was like a chain tightening around her throat. She remembered the video calls with her father. He would always smile and ask, "Are you okay, Diane? Is your little brother behaving?" And she, because of the threatening glare Martha shot her from behind the computer screen, always had to nod. She always had to say, "Yes, Daddy, we're fine." Inside her heart, two parallel worlds existed. A smiling virtual world in front of the video screen, and a dark real world where she was made a servant in her own home. At that moment, Diane lifted her head, looking silently at Martha, and then at Benny. She felt like a shadow existing only to endure. But then, Benny's tiny hand brushed lightly against his sister's neck, a fragile gesture that made Diane tremble. It was the only thread keeping her will to survive intact. Meanwhile, Martha scoffed. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "What are you looking at me for? Think you're better than me? Your mother was praised for being pretty and skilled, while I was called fat and ugly. But look how things are now. She's dead, and I'm the one sitting here in this armchair, making her children kneel at my feet." "That's real life, you stupid brat." Diane bit her lip harder. Still, she remained silent. She only lowered her head, bringing her face closer to Benny's cheek so the baby wouldn't see her shaking with fear. The air grew so heavy it was suffocating. Only the sound of the TV, the wet smack of grape skins hitting the floor, and the weak breathing of an 8-year-old girl trying to balance a fragile world on her shoulders filled the room. Then, suddenly, the loud crack of the front door opening resonated, sharp and abrupt. It was followed by quick, decisive footsteps, along with the deep, gravelly, and authoritative voice of a man. "Diane? What are you doing?" Diane went rigid. The rag slipped from her hands. Her eyes flew wide. Her heart stopped. Martha scrambled up from the sofa. The color drained from her face. She gasped for air. In the doorway stood Alexander Miller, 45 years old. The millionaire father, tall and broad-shouldered, his chiseled features hardened by years in the business world. His eyes froze, stunned by the scene before him. His young daughter, kneeling on the floor, her back bent under the weight of her baby brother, her trembling hands scrubbing the dirty floorboards. While Martha, his sister-in-law, the person he had trusted to care for them, sat comfortably on the sofa, chewing grapes as if she were the true owner of the house. For a moment, the entire space seemed to stop. Martha opened her mouth, about to invent a lie, but Alexander took another step inside. His eyes burned with rage and disbelief. "My God, what is going on here?" Alexander strode into the living room. The sound of his dress shoes on the hardwood floor echoed like an accusation. He reached down, almost tearing the baby from Diane's back. Benny was placed in his father's arms. His fragile little body immediately slumped. His thin arms flailed in the air as if searching for something to hold on to. Alexander clutched his son tightly against his chest, and in that instant, he froze. The baby's body was too thin, as light as a dry leaf. His head lolled listlessly against his father's shoulder, strengthless. His little eyes barely opened, half awake, half dazed, his breathing shallow and irregular. A wave of fear washed over the man who was more accustomed to million-dollar contracts. He raised his head, his voice low and strained, his eyes fixed directly on Martha. "Martha, what is happening here? Why did Diane have to carry him like this? I sent money. Don't tell me there isn't even milk for him." Martha stiffened for a second. Then she quickly regained her composure. She placed her hands on the sofa, feigning offense. Her eyes glistened with false tears. Her voice trembled with drama. "You don't understand, Alexander. This girl is stubborn and defiant. She refuses to study. All she wants is to be lazy. I just wanted to teach her to be responsible, to make sure she knows how to care for her brother. I never wanted to harm the children." Alexander frowned. The anger burned, but he quieted it as his eyes shifted to his daughter. Diane was still kneeling on the floor, her small hand gripping the hem of her dress, her eyes fixed on her father's shoes, as if terrified to meet his gaze. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, her voice escaping in a weak, fragile whisper. Yes, Auntie is right. I wanted to stop going to school." The answer stunned Alexander. He looked at his daughter, his heart clenching. A feeling that something was terribly wrong scratched at him, but he couldn't immediately grasp it. Since his wife's death, he had been consumed by business trips overseas, leaving the children entirely in Martha's care. Every time he video called, he only saw Diane's forced smile as she held her little brother, believing that smile was genuine. Now, with his daughter speaking those words, albeit in a trembling voice, it confirmed Martha's story. A flash of doubt glimmered in him, only to be swept away by years of trusting her, his late wife's sister. Perhaps Martha was just being strict. Perhaps Diane really was being defiant. Martha noticed Alexander's silence and quickly moved closer, her tone full of supposed self-sacrifice. You know, raising children isn't easy. Everything I do is for them. I don't want them to grow up without discipline. You're always away. You don't see what I have to put up with. But it's fine. If you're not satisfied, I'll change. Alexander remained silent, his eyes still fixed on Diane. The girl didn't look up, her shoulders shaking. Her small hand discreetly pulled at her sleeve, hiding the red marks on her wrist. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak again, Benny, in his arms, suddenly began to cough violently. His face turned red, his small body convulsed. Alexander was frantic, holding his son tightly. His voice cracked. Benny, what's wrong with you? My God, what's happening to him? Diane's pale face shot up. She lunged forward. Her trembling hand touched her father's arm. Daddy, you have to pat his back. He always gets like this when he's too hungry. Her words pierced Alexander's heart like a needle. His hands shook as he obeyed, his large palm patting his son's back in rapid movements. Benny let out a weak cry, but it was enough to show there was still life in him. Alexander looked at Diane, his eyes bloodshot. Diane, why didn't you tell me? Why is he so hungry it's come to this? Diane bit her lip. Tears welled in her eyes, but when she glanced at Martha, who stood behind her father with a look as sharp as a blade, the girl immediately dropped her head. Her voice shrank to a lost whisper. I forgot to feed him. It was my fault. Alexander froze. The rage built inside him, threatening to erupt. But reason held it back. He turned to Martha, his eyes severe. You said you were taking care of them, and yet you let this happen. I'm calling the doctor right now. And Martha, from now on, I don't want to see Diane scrubbing the floor on her knees again. Understood? Martha quickly wiped away her false tears. Her voice quavered. Do you really think I abuse the children? I've given them all my care. Anyone can see that. If you feel I haven't done enough, then I apologize. But you shouldn't accuse me like that. The atmosphere grew tense. Diane clung to her father's sleeve but immediately let go when Martha shot her a cold look. The girl's eyes flickered with torment, torn between the impulse to ask for help and the fear of the threats that would follow if she dared speak the truth. Alexander took a deep breath. His heart was still pounding wildly after Benny's coughing fit. He didn't know who to believe, Martha's smooth words or the shadow of fear in his daughter's eyes. At that moment, all he could do was hold his son tightly, a crushing sense of helplessness weighing on him like a stone. A flicker of suspicion stirred in his chest, only to be smothered again when he saw Martha dabbing at her convenient tears. He felt his heart strangled, tormented by a vague premonition that something much worse was hiding beneath the surface. Alexander sat silently in the living room a while later, after placing Benny in his crib. The baby slept deeply, but his breathing was still wheezy, his little face flushed, his lips chapped and dry. Alexander stood, pacing the room, a heavy weight pressing on his chest. Every step echoed in the quiet space, reminding him how much of a stranger he had become in his own home. Martha appeared behind him. Her voice was completely different now, soft and gentle, as if the tense moment earlier had never happened. You should change your clothes and sit down for a proper meal. I've already prepared dinner. You just got back. Don't let little things exhaust you even more. Alexander looked at his sister-in-law, his eyes still heavy with suspicion. However, her kind words, the way Martha so skillfully presented herself as devoted, left him little room to question further. In the end, he just nodded slightly. About an hour later, the long dining room table gleamed under bright lights. Martha had arranged everything meticulously, each dish placed with care, as if for an elegant banquet. Golden roast chicken, steaming soup and fresh vegetables tossed in fragrant olive oil. Glasses of red wine were already poured. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his shoulders slightly slumped, his face showing the exhaustion of his long journey. Diane sat to his right, timid and reserved, her eyes fixed on the plate in front of her. She didn't dare touch her silverware. Her small hands were clenched tightly in her lap. Martha sat to his left. Her elegant smile beamed as if she were the true hostess of this meal. Martha was the first to speak. Her voice was light but confident. If it weren't for me, those 2 children wouldn't have survived until today. I've done everything I can. You're always away, busy with work, and you don't know how difficult Diane is to manage. That girl is stubborn and always makes excuses to avoid studying. I had no choice but to be strict with her. Alexander raised his wine glass, his eyes hesitant, his hand trembling slightly. He remained silent for a few seconds, then spoke slowly, weighing each word. But this afternoon, I saw Diane with my own eyes, carrying the baby on her back and even kneeling to scrub the floor. Martha, how could such a scene happen? If that's what you call strict education, I don't understand how that means making an 8-year-old girl work like an adult. Martha sighed, as if she were the one bearing all the hardships. You only saw one moment and rushed to judgment. Children sometimes need to learn chores to understand responsibility. I've never overworked her, but she is stubborn and disobedient, so I had to discipline her. Have you forgotten that for all these years, I'm the one who raised these 2 children in her place? Without me, do you think they would live as decently as they do now? Her voice emphasized the words, your late wife, deliberately stoking Alexander's memory of the woman he had lost. He fell silent, looking down. A part of him wanted to argue, but the weight of guilt kept him from speaking. Meanwhile, Diane sat motionless. She slowly slid her hand under the table, silently gripping the edge of her father's shirt. Her thin fingers tightened so hard they turned white, as if this were the only lifeline connecting her to hope. Alexander flinched at the pull on his shirt. He turned his eyes slightly and met his daughter's gaze. Her large, round eyes were glistening with tears, as if silently begging for help. His heart constricted. Words almost escaped his lips. But just then, Martha turned her face toward them. Her sharp eyes locked onto Diane like a blade. Diane instantly pulled her hand back, folding it in her lap. Her entire body shrank into itself. She lowered her head. Her eyelashes trembled, remaining silent as if she had never reached out. Alexander looked at his daughter. Pain spread through his chest. He wanted to ask, to press her to speak. But Martha's words from before echoed in his mind again, serving as a convenient excuse. Martha served more soup into his bowl. Her voice was so smooth it was almost impossible to tell if it was real or fake. Don't overthink it. I know you love your daughter, but love without discipline will only spoil her. Diane needs to learn diligence. Benny is weak. He needs extra care, so I asked her to help. Surely that's not wrong, is it? Alexander put down his spoon, staring at the soup bowl without really seeing it. In his mind, the image of Diane kneeling on the floor, her pleading eyes, flashed again. But once more, that vision was smothered by Martha's words about raising the children in her sister's place. He swallowed a sigh and said nothing. The meal dragged on in heavy silence. Diane only ate a few bites. Her hands trembled. Every time she glanced at her father, her eyes filled with hope. Martha was always quick to show a soft smile, as if reminding her she was not allowed to speak. When the meal was ending, Alexander stood up, pushing back his chair. I'm going to rest in my room. I'm very tired today. Diane awkwardly stood up to follow him, but Martha quickly put a hand on her shoulder, pressing just hard enough to keep her in place. Wash the dishes, Diane. Chores are part of learning. Your father needs to rest. You must learn to share the burden. Diane lowered her head and replied softly, Yes, ma'am. Alexander looked back, wanting to object, but he held back. He turned, walking toward the hallway, leaving a suffocating air behind him. The hallway leading to the stairs was darker than the dining room. Alexander walked slowly, his mind in a whirlwind. What he had seen today did not align with the faith he had held for years. He stopped halfway up the stairs. His hand tightened on the wooden railing. Suddenly, a voice came from the living room. Quiet, but clear. It was Martha's, stripped of all its earlier sweetness, speaking into her phone. "Don't worry. My lawyer will handle everything. Alexander still trusts me completely. No one can take away what I already have in my hands." Alexander froze, his body turning to stone. Every word hit him like a hammer. He held his breath, leaning closer to the railing, straining to hear more. Martha's voice continued, quick and low, but sharp enough to pierce the stillness. "The money arrives steadily, and he doesn't suspect a thing. Just a little more time, and everything will belong to me completely." Alexander was paralyzed. His heart pounded furiously. Sweat beaded on his palms. All the doubts he had just crushed returned with fierce strength. He didn't continue up the stairs. He just stood there on the step, his mind ringing with one question. Had everything he believed all these years been nothing more than a carefully staged performance by Martha? Alexander stood frozen on the staircase, the blood draining from his face. "My lawyer? Everything will belong to me." The words echoed in the opulent hallway, confirming a betrayal so deep it stole his breath. He didn't confront her. He knew, with the chilling certainty of a CEO sensing a corporate takeover, that this was a calculated attack. He was being systematically removed from his own life, and his children were the collateral. He retreated silently to his study, the image of his daughter scrubbing the floor burning behind his eyes. He spent the night sleepless, not in grief, but in strategy. He was a fool for trusting his late wife's sister, but he would not be a fool in how he took her down. The next morning, he came downstairs, forcing a mask of normalcy. "Diane," he said, his voice gentle as she sat listlessly at the kitchen table. "How are you feeling?" As she looked up, her long sleeve slid down, revealing the dark, sickening imprint of an adult hand on her thin arm. Alexander's vision went red. "Who did this?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a low growl. Diane panicked, yanking the sleeve down. "I fell, Daddy. I promise, I just fell." Martha emerged from the pantry, holding a coffee mug. "Honestly, Alexander," she scoffed, "you're smothering her. Children are clumsy. You can't wrap them in bubble wrap." Alexander looked from the terrified girl to the smirking woman. He said nothing, but the last shred of his denial evaporated. This was not discipline. It was torture. He didn't have to wait long for the next escalation. That very afternoon, while Martha was out running errands, likely meeting with his treacherous lawyer Edward Collins, a horrifying, wheezing cry came from the nursery. Alexander sprinted upstairs. Benny was lying in his crib, his small body rigid, his face a mottled purple, and his skin burning with fever. He was struggling to breathe. Alexander scooped up his son, shouting for Diane to call 911. Just then, Martha returned, her arms full of shopping bags. "What is all this hysteria?" she snapped, seeing Alexander with the phone. "He can't breathe. I'm calling an ambulance." "Don't you dare!" she shrieked, her mask of civility gone. "It's a simple cold. Do you know how much an emergency room visit costs? You'll waste thousands." "Get out of my way, Martha," Alexander roared, shoving past her with his son in his arms. At the hospital, a sharp-eyed pediatrician named Dr. Evans took one look at Benny and immediately put him on oxygen. After a series of rapid tests, she returned to the waiting room, her face grim. "Mr. Miller," she said, "this isn't just a cold. Your son is suffering from severe malnutrition. His immune system is compromised, which is why this respiratory infection is life-threatening. Frankly, this looks like profound neglect." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Malnutrition. While he had been wiring Martha tens of thousands of dollars a month, as he sat vigil by Benny's incubator, his phone lit up with alerts. Martha and Collins had launched their offensive. News sites and gossip blogs were exploding. "Millionaire Alexander Miller's affair with sister-in-law revealed," ran one headline. "Father's neglect leaves infant son hospitalized," screamed another. They were using his son's medical crisis, a crisis they created, as a weapon against him. The emergency custody hearing was a blur. Martha sat opposite him, dabbing at crocodile tears, the picture of a wronged, devoted guardian. Her lawyer, Edward Collins, the man who knew all of Alexander's financial and personal secrets, stood up. "Your Honor," Collins said smoothly, We have evidence that Mr. Miller is not only a negligent father, but a manipulative one. His own daughter is terrified of him. He produced a USB drive. This video was taken by Ms. Perez just last week. The courtroom screen flickered to life. It showed Diane, her face pale and her eyes downcast. Her voice was a barely audible whisper. I'm scared of my daddy. He's always angry. He doesn't love me? No, Alexander bellowed, lunging to his feet. That's a lie. She's been threatened. Look at her. Diane was trembling in her seat, staring at Martha with wide, terrified eyes. The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Miller, sit down. This evidence is compelling. It was a perfect trap. He was the absent, angry father. Martha was the loving caregiver. He was losing. He was going to lose his children. I have evidence. The voice was rough, coming from the back of the courtroom. A woman in a worn coat strode forward. It was Rachel, his cranky, antisocial next-door neighbor. I'm not a nice person, Your Honor, Rachel said, her voice carrying across the silent room. I keep to myself, but I'm not deaf, and I'm not blind. She held up an old smartphone. I heard the screaming. I heard the threats, so I started recording. She pressed play. The courtroom filled with Martha's shrill, unmistakable voice. If you dare whisper one word of this to your father again, I'll pour all the formula down the drain. I swear it. Let him starve! A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Martha's face went ashen. Furthermore, Rachel continued, I'm the one who's been leaving formula on their porch for the last month, because I knew that woman was starving that baby. Before the judge could even react, the courtroom doors opened again. I have more, Your Honor. A man in a driver's uniform, Brian, his former chauffeur, rushed in, waving a thick stack of papers. Ms. Perez fired me when I questioned her, but I kept the receipts. She had me drive her to a pawn shop in the city every single week. She sold the baby formula, the imported toys, the designer clothes, everything Mr. Miller sent home for those kids. It's all here! The dam of lies broke. Martha shrieked, It's a conspiracy. They all hate me. But her lawyer, Edward Collins, seeing his own career about to be implicated in fraud and perjury, silently packed his briefcase and sat down. The judge's gavel struck the desk like a gunshot. This court finds the evidence against Ms. Perez to be overwhelming. The temporary custody order is revoked. Full and immediate custody of Diane and Benjamin Miller is restored to their father, Alexander Miller. Officers, take Ms. Perez into custody on suspicion of child endangerment, felony fraud, and perjury. As Martha was handcuffed, screaming and protesting, Alexander ran to his daughter. He swept her up into his arms, burying his face in her hair as she sobbed. It's over, Diane, he whispered, his own tears streaming down his face. It's over. You're safe. I've got you. Weeks later, the house was quiet again, but it was a warm, peaceful quiet. The sound of a children's storybook being read aloud drifted from the living room. Alexander sat in the armchair, a healthy, giggling Benny on his lap, while Diane was snuggled against his side, her eyes bright and trusting. The shadows were gone. He had been blind, but now he could see. He had his family back, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure they were never afraid again.